Well, at the very least, we're gonna be taking a bit of credit because we predicted this all the way back when we had this video complaining about the state of the frames for healers. We did point out that the one main solution for Blizzard, the only logical one, was going to manually come up with some exceptions to the healers buttons and not make secret their everyday run-of-the-mill buttons. So you still could have kept secret their interrupts, to not have an interrupt tracker, the big externals, to not be able to have something like an Omni CD to show who has which defensives, which external available. Keep secret the offensive cooldowns for DPS, so again you can't have Omni CD showing you who is using which cooldowns, just like because Blizzard apparently now doesn't want to. But your everyday working man blue-collar healer buttons, so Reju, Germination, Regrowth, Life Bloom, Wild Growth. These are inoffensive things. No other player will care about checking your healer's Wild Growth cooldown, right? And that's what Blizzard is doing. That's the current temporary white flag they have raised. As they say, while we had originally hoped to be able to deliver a streamlined default experience, it has become clear, nice, 2 days before the release of the expansion, that there are common use cases that a single set of logic cannot cover. Because some players might want a certain ability to be seen, like Evoker's Echo or their beacons, while others would consider those clutter and they would not want to see them. So their solution is to have temporarily removed these restrictions from some abilities. As Blizzard says, we are now, keyword, this is problematic, it should have been done months ago, we are now beginning to work on a system to allow players to hide or emphasize buffs from their spellcasts on a per spell basis. So we decide which spell via the spellbook. We expect that solution to be ready for players in a later midnight patch. But in the meantime, we're giving you this solution, which is freeing up, the default, the most used abilities for Preservation Evoker, for even for Rogue, and then Rest of the Druid, Disc Priest, Holy Priest, all the healers, and a few of the long-term raid buffs will also be able to be part of this non-secret clump of abilities. I wouldn't be too worried about the point where they say this is only temporary, because then we will come up with something of our own, but something of their own has no mention of being able to style the buttons the way you want, because keeping these abilities now no longer secret means your grid, your soon-to-come cell add-on coming back, will be able to shape them just like you had in The War Within. Just like this. You will be able to be back to have your health bar being able to be colored a different way based on a buff you have on the players. You will be able to make icons glow, to turn an icon into a red circle or a green square, as well as still reposition all of these things wherever you want. Top left, bottom right, center, right, left, top, bottom, wherever. Meanwhile, from Blizzard's own words, their system would just be, we give you some checkboxes in your spellbook to choose if you want a certain spell to be emphasized or to be hidden, but nothing else. It is likely Blizzard will still allow that system to be hooked up by the add-ons, so if you choose to hide them, the add-ons can just ignore them, and if you choose to emphasize them, the add-on can pick them up to shape them how they want. It would be pretty bad, pretty bad on Blizzard if you allow for a full season healers to play with the frames they want, and then they take away all of that functionality because they come with their own solution, except their solution is much worse than what we are going to have now. Now, Blizzard does practically directly mentions Harrek as the reason for this, so Blizzard was perfectly fine releasing our healer frames in a terrible state until Harrek and its add-on that we covered, being able to now finally move around our own healer tools the way we wanted to, lit a fire under their ass. As they say, we have also seen a few add-ons popping up that use non-secret information, so completely legal and completely legit ways to make very reliable guesses about players' spellcasts in order to drive this sort of filtering logic. And they were even mad. You can see they say breaking the API calls, which we wanted to do, because we didn't want this to work. Unfortunately, breaking the API calls driving this functionality would have caused significant collateral damage to common add-ons. This is because one of the more common ways you can start working by trying to figure out with Guesswork which ability is which are very common returns like unit spellcast succeeded and unit aura, which are used by tons of other features in your UI. Even your cast bar, for example, the cast bar of the enemies on the nameplates, the unit auras showing up in your frames or in the nameplates, etc, etc. So you'd have to break those to stop the Harrek's addon, which would have been, of course, a problem. Now, if you want a very small TLDR on what the issue was, is that when you're trying to filter which auras you want to show, in front of you you have like 10 different black boxes. You have no idea what they are, you can't see their name, you can't see their tooltip, you can't see their cooldowns, but you still can ask questions. You can use get aura data by index, and then trying to index, as you can see from the midnight version, they added secret when unit aura restricted, which is what Blizzard put on most of your buttons. But there are still many things you can ask these black boxes. They won't tell you their name and what they do, but you can ask them, are you harmful? Are you helpful? Are you coming from myself, from my player? Are you listed to only show up in raid and in combat in raid? Are you listed to be cancelable? An aura buff on you that can be cancelable or not cancelable? Are you listed to only show up in nameplates instead of your frames? Are you an external defensive? Are you a crowd control button? Are you a big defensive? Are you an important button? Are you a dispellable buff? Are you a stealable buff? All of these things could still be asked to these nameless black boxes for you to try to guess what they were. Now, the final point that made Harrek's addon and the ability to correctly, very likely correctly, detect which ability was which was the points return. The points was Blizzard putting the tooltips to be secret, but they were still returning a number, points, based on what basically the set of numbers in the tooltip. You know, an ability heals for X and then X over time for X seconds, and also puts a shield for X seconds and tags the players with this buff for X seconds. These series of points were still returning in the question being asked, even though it was still secret and you still couldn't see what it was talking about, you would still get the points. Now, this is crucial because when you start playing the guessing game and you start putting all of these series of conditionals to all of the abilities of the healers, you will start to be able to make some pretty precise guesses. For example, you already can differentiate between echo and reversion, because echo returns 2 points from the tooltip and reversion returns 3. So you already know which is which. But then you're asking, hold on a second, but then reversion and echo reversion, so the duplicate of reversion, have the same points returning. True, but echo reversion does not count as a raid buff by Blizzard. So you can differentiate also between reversion and echo reversion, because reversion does show up in your raid frames by default from Blizzard, so you can differentiate them. And then you're like, hold on, but Dream Breath is also not counted as a raid buff, just like echo reversion, so you cannot differentiate between them. Hold on, echo reversion and reversion are dispellable. Dream Breath is not dispellable, so you can also differentiate between Dream Breath and reversion. That's how you were able to play the guess game with the addon and correctly assign each black box to the corresponding actual ability, by listing all of these conditionals, checking the differences between the different abilities, and essentially come to the conclusion of which was which. There were way more than these conditionals. There were like more than a dozen of possible questions you could have asked. So at the very least, we will have this freedom on release, a near, not quite, but near freedom like we had in the War Within to shape up our frames the way we wanted to. However, there are still some concerns though. Concern number one is degeneracy, because I'm sure you remember addons, weak auras like the Power Infusion Reminder, the Power Infusion Helper, which was also used for things like Innervate, for example, as well as macros you could have been using, for example, tanks asking for externals, right? Well, now that we have some official buttons no longer secret by Blizzard, you can start some degenerate thinking with these. For example, think about Battle Shout. Battle Shout is part of the long-term raid buffs no longer being secret, much like Arcane Intellect or Source of Magic from an Evoker, Sky Fury from a Shaman, right? They're not secret. Meaning you can much more easily just hide them, ignore them, make an addon, I was about to say a weak aura, make an addon that again can warn you if there is a missing buff, because it's not secret. Now you can check if someone doesn't have Battle Shout after being combat rest, for example. That's possible again. However, with this not being secret, this means that now you can create addons, create macros that can warn you and ask you to do something based on the buffs being there or missing. Meaning that, for example, a healer asking for Innervate could very simply use a macro that cancel Aura's Battle Shout, and then another one, let's say a Druid, uses an addon that allows them to receive a Whisper and have a pop-up with a glow and a warning to innervate that player, the one that is missing Battle Shout, because Battle Shout is no longer secret. And as we also checked from the possible returns you can have in the getting the unit auras by index, is cancelable is a visible request. And Battle Shout, of course, is a cancelable ability. So you cancel Battle Shout as a healer with a Cancel Aura macro, which also whispers the Druid. Druid gets the Whisper, sees the glow on the frame of the player because he is missing Battle Shout, and innervates him. You can then do the same for Power Infusion. A Mage can also freely cancel Battle Shout, as it's useless for them. Perhaps a Fury Warrior wants PI. Well, Fury Warrior is not going to cancel Battle Shout, he's going to cancel Arcane Intellect and Whisper the Priest, who is going to use Power Infusion on the guy that's missing Arcane Intellect. You can even do the same for tanks. Tanks don't need Arcane Intellect, for example, so a tank wanting Pain Suppression can just cancel Aura Arcane Intellect and ask for an external. That's one kind of degeneracy that can be allowed now with these buffs, the ability to just now request things based on Cancel Aura of certain buttons, which is now available because Blizzard lifted these useless things from their secrets. It is possible. It is possible this system will come in the release of this season if it will continue to stay like this, because at the moment with these things no longer being secret, there is nothing actually stopping this from happening. Now, the other question mark, which might turn more into a fear, is the statement from Blizzard. That's what is keeping players worried. The statement that this is only temporary, because then we come up with our own solution. The whole thing where we allow you to hide or emphasize buffs from their spell casts on a per spell basis via the spellbook. That is making players worried, because what they care more about is that now with these spells no longer being secret is to not just hide them. Hide them was the minimum. Healers weren't just happy about being able to hide what they don't want to see, like the shield from Temporal Anomaly, perhaps the Mastery, the Echo of Light on a Holy Priest, but also the fact that you can shape them how you want. Meanwhile, the Blizzard solution is only strictly referring to allow you to hide or emphasize buffs. For context, emphasize for Blizzard means we guarantee if you emphasize this spell is going to be in the front of your buffs all the time, instead of randomly depending on the order of buffs you put on the player, or alternatively also making it larger. But there is no mention of putting them where you want. Top left, minor buff in top right, even smaller buff in bottom left, big buff cooldown in center. No way to do this. Or alternatively the shape, not just the position. So I don't want an icon, I want a square. I don't want an icon, I want a green dot. I don't want an icon, I want a hover on the HP of the players. That's not mentioned by Blizzard anywhere. So players have the fear that, okay, so we do the first season with grid, with cell, with Dunder's frames, with all of the shaping we want, and then Blizzard comes back with their solution which just resets everything we have gotten up to so far, and the only thing we have is gonna be the hiding, being able to hide what we don't want to see. But then we are back having all of the buffs in a single line, all of the buffs in the bottom right, not being able to move them. We lose all of the things we customized, our health overlays, our dots, our squares, our borders, all of those are gone. That's what is making some players worried, based on the statement of Blizzard of their incoming replacement in a future patch. As I said, the most likely and the most hopeful logic is that having these abilities enabled, emphasized in the spellbook, will still be allowed by add-ons to be hooked on. At least these very same abilities that are still being allowed now. So the generic everyday healer tools would still be allowed to be shaped by add-ons anyways, in order to allow you to still keep the frames you wanted. That's the other worry for healers for now. But at the very least, they won't have to worry about it at the release of the season and for the first season of the expansion. We will see later down. I do think it will be too late for Blizzard. I think the blowback will be too hard. You can just let players, give players a better quality of life for several months and then come back not just come back, but announce your solution after months, and then the solution is drastically worse than what players have gotten up to that point with add-ons. It would be quite bad. So I do think that once this cat is out of the bag, once these filters on these abilities are gone, Blizzard won't take them away again, is my point. But at the very least for now, you can forget about this possible future problem and just be partially happy that you get this, because don't forget, this is a feature that was asked ever since the alpha was a thing. We're talking about 4+ months ago, and now we have the announcement of this happening 2 days before the early access of the expansion. And even looking at the announcement itself, it's only something that Blizzard was forced to do because one guy came up with one add-on that was able to circumvent the logic of the restrictions of Blizzard, and Blizzard realized it was using way too crucial API calls to be just broken and cancelled, since they were going to break a ton of other things if they wanted to stop that. So they had no other option than to basically pretend this was their plan all along. So even in this case, it wasn't a good look anyways for Blizzard, but at least we gained something out of it. So this is what we have for today on this Wednesday, the reset leading to the release of the early access of Midnight. We will see the effect of this filtering in a few days once Midnight launches, and this will be available for add-ons. These filter lifting will be now available also for add-ons, so we will see just how much customization we will be able to do via add-ons on all of these abilities. But for today though, on this Wednesday, this is all we can talk about. We're starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, it's okay. We went to sleep. We were thinking about sleeping 8+ hours. We only slept 6, but we went to take like a 2-hour nap earlier on, so it kind of balances out.